There are so many weird words in sewing, right? I know, because when I started to learn to sew, it's like learning another language. That's why I've put together this whole series that is Learn to Speak Dressmaker. So you can think of it as like your sewing dictionary. We'll go over all of the terminology you need to know to be a better sewer. And today in this video, we're going to talk about what is the grain line, straight grain, and how to find it and how to use it. Welcome back, lovely ladies and gents. If we haven't actually met yet, my name is Evelyn Wood and I'm a dressmaker and sewing teacher. And this whole series is actually brought to you by my online sewing school, vintagesewingschool.com. Now, let's talk about what is grain line, straight grain, all of these things. They are all somewhat similar and will relate to each other, in which case I'm going to start from zero and we'll work our way up and explain each to you. So let's start with what is the grain of fabric. The grain is the direction of the threads or yarns that actually make up the fabric. So let's talk about what this is before we talk about the direction of the grain. So if we take a closer look at fabric and how it's actually constructed, you'll notice that on a plain basic weave, so think just a regular cotton fabric, if you fray the edges, you'll find that you have threads running along with the selvage edge of your fabric. If you don't know what selvage is, please refer to my other video. I'm going to link it up below. So you'll find that there are threads running in this direction a long ways, and there are threads running in this direction. And if you think they're sort of woven, all the threads coming down here go over and under, and all the threads running this way go over and under. Most people understand it by thinking about like a basket weave and how it's constructed, how you've got the weavers going one up, one down this way, and they cross over each other in sort of a 90-degree angle. That's how most people understand it, and that's the very basic way that fabric is constructed. And so when you fray the edges, you can actually see the threads, or actually they're called yarns, coming off, and this is what frays in the fabric. So now we know how the basis of how fabric is actually made. Let's talk about the direction of the grain. So keeping in mind, the grain is the direction of all these yarns or threads that make up the fabric. Now there are actually 3 different grain directions that we use in sewing. If we have a look at my fabric I have laid out here, this edge here is my selvage. And now what can be referred to as the lengthwise grain, or often it's called the straight grain, is the threads, the grain, that runs parallel to this selvage edge. So that means all the ones that run down in this direction, running lengthwise on the fabric. So the lengthwise grains are these ones that run parallel to the selvage edge. And now equally, the crosswise grain is when we talk about the grain that runs in a perpendicular. So we're talking in a 90-degree angle to the selvage. So that's the ones that run across our crosswise grain, and they go on the shorter distance of the fabric, if you will, from selvage to selvage. And now the missing piece is the 3rd direction, and that is actually the bias. And that is where we then cross these 2 sections. It is directly in the middle between the lengthwise grain, the straight grain, and the bias grain is then actually a 45-degree angle from there. And if we have a look, it is actually the stretchiest part of the fabric. Now, bias is going to have an entire video by itself. It will explain about it and how to find it. So I will link that up in the description box below. For this video, we're just going to talk about the 2 straight, the crosswise and the lengthwise grain. So now we know that the grain of the fabric is the way that the threads run through it that make it up. And the 2 directions, so we have our crosswise and our lengthwise grain. But what is the grain line? The grain line is this line that you'll see on every single pattern piece. We'll have an indication of a line like this with little arrows in it. This is the grain line. It marks and indicates the direction of the straight grain or the lengthwise grain on your fabric. So this arrow, these grain lines on your pattern pieces should always be running parallel to your selvage edge. And that is how you get it straight. So you can see on my checked fabric here, I've used this one so you can see it a lot easier. The cross and the straight grain is very easy to see. So you always want to measure. This line here should run parallel to the selvage edge. So it should be the same measurement here and the same measurement here. If it is off center like this, off skew, that is not correct. That is not running along the straight grain of the fabric. And so you might be asking, how important is it to actually follow the grain line in your fabric and patterns? Well, it is actually extremely important and is one of the basic rules. I'm going to quickly touch on it so you have a little bit of an idea of why. I've used the checks again as a great example. So we want the grain line to run parallel because, for instance, if you have a checked fabric like this that is printed, if we have it off skew like this, you can see that the fabric and how then it goes on your body. And so if you cut out all your pattern pieces and they're not using like a uniform and they all are following the same grain line, imagine this piece could have the stripes going this way, and then if you've done it differently, the stripes could go this way on this piece. You want them to all be uniform and all flow straight down the body. Makes sense, right? And so this also comes into fact of there's different amounts of like stretch and give in the fabric in different directions. This lengthwise grain, which we always use in sewing, has the least amount of stretch, and so that goes down the body because we don't want it to stretch there. The crosswise grain, we always want to go across the body because it has that slightly bit more stretch. And then, as I said, there are a few more terms to learn in this sort of cluster. So think bias, think selvage, think right and wrong sides of fabric. These are all the different terms that you might want to learn to get a better understanding of this. Now, let's just go through those again to make sure we know what we're talking about. So we've covered what is the grain. The grain is the direction of the threads or yarns that actually make up the fabric, remember? Over, under. We have the lengthwise grain, or often referred to as the straight grain, that runs parallel to the selvage of the fabric. The cross grain is perpendicular at a 90-degree angle to the selvage. And the grain line is the line that is indicated on the pattern piece which direction to follow to get the straight grain. It should match and run along the straight grain of the fabric. So now you should have a really good understanding of what all that means. Now, I would really appreciate it if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and like it. And let me know below in the comments how useful you found this video, if you really struggled with this concept or anything else I might have missed out to help other people understand this term and how it works as well. That would be really great. So make sure you read down there as well. Remember to subscribe if you have not already so that you get all of the rest, and I hope you watch the rest of the series. So until next time, bye.